Always choose truth.
We ask the questions. What is needed in the world?
Pukovnik Morris Davis je 2 godine, od 2005. do 2007. bio glavni tužilac u vojnom zatvoru Guantanamo Bay, gdje američka vlada od januara 2002. pa do danas drži zatočene osumnjičenike za terorizam koji godine provode u zatvoru bez ikakvih optužnica ili suđenja. Pukovnik Davis je podnio ostavku na mjesto glavnog tužioca zbog toga što su dokazi do kojih su istražioci dolazili u Guantanamu dobijeni kroz mučenja zatvorenika te zbog pritisaka ljudi iz Bushove administracije na tužilaštvo u Guantanamu. Pukovnik Davis je sada profesor prava na Univerzitetu Howard u Washingtonu. Na čelu je akcije prikupljanja potpisa, čiji je cilj zatvaranje Guantanama, gdje je 100 zatvorenika već duže vrijeme u štrajku glađu. Do sada je prikupljeno blizu 190.000 potpisa, a ta peticija će biti upućena predsjedniku Obami kao dokaz da Guantanamo treba zatvoriti.
Colonel Davis, thank you so much to coming to our program. And the first question is actually very simple. What is the current situation in Guantanamo Bay?
Well, it's been kind of a stalemate for the last couple of years since President Obama, first took office in 2009, signed the order in January that it would be closed within 1 year, and then hit some roadblocks, and it's been effectively a stalemate since then. So you still have 166 men that are confined at Guantanamo. A majority of those, and I think the American public's largely ignorant of this fact, that a majority of the men that are there are men that the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Justice, Department of Defense have reviewed their cases and determined that they didn't commit a crime, we're not going to charge them, they don't pose a threat, and we don't want to keep them. So a majority of the people at Guantanamo that we're spending about $900,000 per year per person to keep there are men that we don't want to keep.
And why they're still there?
It's been a lack of political will, I think, on the part of President Obama. I mean, I think he was sincere in January 2009 when he took office and signed the order to close Guantanamo. It's interesting, if you back up just a bit, in 2008, remember President Bush said he wanted to close Guantanamo. And then John McCain, when he was running against Obama, said he wanted to close Guantanamo. So for a period of time, it was a nonpartisan issue. Everybody wanted to close Guantanamo. But then in January 2009, when President Obama signed the order, you had people like Mitch McConnell who said, my goal is to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And so whatever he was for, the Republicans were against. And so once he said he was going to close it, they said, the hell you are, and made it difficult for him. And I just don't think he's had the political backbone to stand up to him and get it done.
And right now we have a situation that President Obama talked about Guantanamo, closing Guantanamo one more time a few days ago, and he said that Guantanamo doesn't keep us safer at all. Right. How do you see that new situation right now?
Well, I was really encouraged to hear him say that. But I've heard him say things in the past that I was encouraged to hear, and words are great, but you need some action to go with the words. But last Tuesday, when he had the question came up at the press conference, is the most I've heard him say about Guantanamo since 2009. And he articulated all the right reasons for why Guantanamo makes no sense. It's expensive, it's a stain on our reputation, it hurts our relations with our allies, it hurts us with our adversaries. China came out with a human rights report recently that criticizes the U.S. for Guantanamo. Not too long ago, when the Congress passed a bill to prohibit a number of Russian diplomats from coming to the U.S., Russia retaliated, and President Putin said, who is the U.S. to lecture us on human rights when they've got Guantanamo? So policy-wise, it hurts us both with allies and adversaries. From a legal standpoint, every case that's been generated out of Guantanamo, from Rasul, Hamdan, Boumediene, has been a black eye for the government. So what's the upside to keeping Guantanamo open other than providing some talking points for the far right to beat up on President Obama? But there's no really good reason to keep it open.
Right now we have a very interesting situation. We have calling that two actions. Mm-hmm. One is coming from inside, like from Guantanamo. I'm talking about hunger strikes,
Right.
of course, and other is coming outside of Guantanamo. We are talking about petition, and you are leading man for that. Can we talk first of all about this petition, please? How many people signed the petition? What is the goal?
Right. There's a group called Witness Against Torture that had approached me about sponsoring a petition to close Guantanamo, inspired largely by the hunger strike and trying to find some way to resolve this problem without people having to die. So I agreed to do it. We worked on it. It just happened to go up on the Tuesday that President Obama talked about Guantanamo. And so today is the 9th day that the petition has been up. We're up to 190,000 people that have signed the petition. And it's not, I think a lot of folks say, well, sure, you know, it's a bunch of those left-wingers, you know, the tree huggers that are, you know, going to do that kind of thing. But we've had admirals and generals, the former Judge Advocate General of the Navy, Nick Kristof from the New York Times, Naomi Wolf, the author, people from the intelligence community. It's been a pretty broad swath of the public that has agreed that it makes no sense to keep this place open and we need to close it. So I'm really encouraged that at times, you know, I felt like Don Quixote over the years, that I keep tilting at this windmill, and it really is encouraging to me that many people are willing to sign on. And I hope it's encouraging to the detainees that I think had given up hope, that they've spent more than a decade in confinement and they've just been forgotten.
Tell me, what is the next step for that petition? What do you think? What can you do with those signatures?
So I think the more support that we can show for the president's position that it needs to be closed, I think the better. It was encouraging as well. We had Dianne Feinstein about 2 weeks ago sent a letter to President Obama encouraging him to repatriate the cleared detainees and to get them out of Guantanamo. So I think the more momentum we can get and the more support from different angles, I think it's going to make it more difficult for the critics to try to articulate a reason for why we ought to keep this place open.
Hunger strike. It's a very difficult situation. We have now 166 prisoners in Guantanamo.
Right.
As I know, around 100 of them, they're on hunger strike. Can you give us some details, please?
Yeah, I believe I saw Carol Rosenberg from the Miami Herald has probably spent as much time at Guantanamo as many of the detainees have, but I believe I saw yesterday where she reported that there are 26 of the 100 that are on hunger strike that are being force-fed. That means strapping them into a chair to immobilize them, and then taking a tube and running it through their nose, down their throat, into their stomach, and then pumping a dietary supplement into their stomach to give them calories and nutrition. It's for the administration, I think it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, you know, quagmire. If you force feed the detainees, you know, the UN has criticized it. The medical community, the American Medical Association, has expressed concern about, I mean, these are people that are conscious and capable of making their own medical decisions. And if you're performing a medical procedure against their wishes, when they have the capacity to say yes or no, then medically it's unethical to force feed them. But the alternative is to sit there and watch them die, which is not a palatable answer either. So it really is a tough.
Yeah, it is interesting because it is tough. I remember, you remember probably that when late Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of Britain, that a gentleman who was first man of IRA was on hunger strike, and he died. That didn't stop him. But after that, he became a legend and hero for his followers. Is this case also here?
It is. I mean, it's unfortunate that it takes putting your life in jeopardy in order to get America to pay attention and to take notice that you're sitting there and have been there for more than a decade and have never had a trial. But I think I can understand as irrational as killing yourself seems, you can almost see this as a rational choice, that if you spent a decade sitting there forgotten with no prospect of going home or a trial, and your choice is spend the rest of your life in that limbo or risking death, it's not an irrational choice that's being made, and it has called attention to Guantanamo. But I think there's a solution other than force feeding or death. I think the solution is to fly a plane into Guantanamo, load up the 56 Yemenis that have been cleared for transfer that the Yemeni government has requested be returned, and fly them out of there and send them home. Because I think if the detainees that are left see that they're not forgotten, there is light at the end of the tunnel, then I think they'd give up the hunger strike. But I think right now it's just that sense of hopelessness that it's this or nothing. So I think some forward progress on getting people out of there would end the hunger strike.
A lawyer for 16 prisoners who are on hunger strike told that yesterday that General Bogdan actually just need to stop guards to check their Qurans and everything. Right. Is it possible to be like that motive for a strike?
Yeah, my understanding is I think that was the original basis for the strike beginning, was the concern of the mistreatment of the Quran. And then I think it grew from that. And from that initial group that were hunger striking because of the Quran, it broadened into people frustrated with being cleared to be transferred out and still sitting there year after year after year. So I think it's become this battle of wills, where on the one hand you've got the military guard force that don't want to let the inmates run the facility, and the inmates saying that their rights are being disrespected by the guard force, and it's really just evolved into this, this no-win situation.
Yeah. Can you explain to us a little bit how is inside? Mm-hmm. I was there 2008, but of course I couldn't get inside of a cell of some parts of Guantanamo Bay prison. What does that mean? There in some cell, some prisoners in one cell. You have 2, 3 kinds of prisoners. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Right. Yeah, and I think there's again this gross misperception of Guantanamo. In fact, a lot of folks would say, let's close Guantanamo and bring the detainees to the U.S. and prosecute them in federal court. Some of the detainees may not like it if they get what they wish for. Ahmed Gilani, for instance, was the only detainee that's been transferred from Guantanamo to the U.S., where he was prosecuted in federal court and convicted and is serving his sentence in a federal supermax prison, which I bet if you ask him today, would you rather be here or back at Guantanamo, he would probably take Guantanamo, because as far as the physical facilities to go, they're pretty decent. I think the public still pictures those iconic photos that were made at Camp X-Ray, the dog cage looking facilities, that I think to this day, if you mention Guantanamo, that's what most people conjure up in their mind. Where Camp X-Ray was a facility that was left over from the Haitian boat lift from years before. And so when the decision was made to transport detainees to Guantanamo, that was the facility that was already in place. And it was open from January of 2002 until April of 2002. So for about 100 days, that facility was in business until more permanent facilities could be built. So, that whole, I think the picture people have in their mind of Guantanamo is rusted and overgrown with weeds and hadn't been used in more than a decade. The current facilities that are inside where I'm sure you went, when you went through the gate inside the perimeter, they're little camps within the broader perimeter. Within that, there are a group of facilities where detainees live in a communal environment, where there's a dozen or so to a building, with beds that are sleep together, they eat together. They just built them a new $750,000 soccer field where they can play soccer, they can watch television. So it's more of a communal environment. Now certainly, it's no substitute for having your freedom, but I think there are a lot of Americans that are incarcerated that if they could see the conditions at Guantanamo would gladly trade places. There are others, the ones that are deemed a more higher risk, are in individual cells. In the cells, in fact, when I go out and speak, I've got a slideshow I do, and I show a picture of a cell from Camp 5. And I'll ask, what's inhumane about this cell? And often people will look at it and they'll say, well, it's small and it's got a little window and it just doesn't look very pleasant. And then I put up a picture of another cell, and I go, well, what's inhumane about this one? And the audience will usually go, well, it looks just like the first one. And I'll say, well, you're exactly right. This is where Congressman Bill Jankalow served his sentence. This is where Omar Khadr was serving his. And they're identical because the facility at Guantanamo was built using a blueprint of a prison here in the U.S. So physically, it's the same facility that we've got Americans incarcerated in. But it's not really so much the physical facilities, it's the whole legal basis for why they're there that's the problem with Guantanamo. So it sounds, it makes a neat bumper sticker, close Gitmo, but closing Gitmo is not the solution. It's the underlying, how did we get there to begin with, problem that's got to be solved. Because if you recall, back in 2009, President Obama had proposed moving him to a federal facility in Illinois.
That's right.
Which would have closed Guantanamo, but you'd have just made a new Guantanamo in Illinois. So closing Gitmo is not the solution. It's resolving the legal issues related to Guantanamo that really have to be addressed.
We talk about torture. You said that no doubt we had some torture. A little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, in my mind, that issue is over and settled. I can tell you, I was on Twitter this morning arguing with some people who were saying, we don't torture, we've never tortured, we use enhanced interrogation techniques, which is just a nice label to try to sanitize torture. And it's not just me. John McCain on Fox News, with Greta Van Susteren said, waterboarding is torture, we engaged in torture, it violates the Geneva Conventions. You had Susan Crawford. When I was the chief prosecutor for the last 6 months or so,
she's very close to Dick Cheney.
Yes. Yeah, she was. When I resigned, she was in charge of the military commissions. They'd been appointed, by the Bush administration to run the military commissions. And earlier in her career, she had been, when Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense, Susan Crawford was his Inspector General. So she's not like a bleeding heart, tree-hugging liberal. She was a dyed-in-the-wool right-wing Republican. In January of 2009, a week before President Obama took office, while President Bush was, I assume, packing boxes at the White House to move out, Ms. Crawford did an interview with Bob Woodward in the Washington Post. And there was one case that I personally was handling when I was chief prosecutor, and it was the case of Mohammed al-Qahtani, who was the real 20th hijacker. After I had left and the prosecution went forward with charges against Mr. Qahtani, Ms. Crawford dismissed the charges. So in the interview in January of 2009, Bob Woodward said, why'd you dismiss the charges against Mohammed al-Qahtani? And Ms. Crawford, remember, Dick Cheney's protege, in her words said, we tortured al-Qahtani. Our treatment of him met the legal definition of torture, and I dismissed the charges. So it's not just me, it's not just John McCain, it's not just Susan Crawford. There have been judges, military judges, federal judges, a broad range of people that have said, prisoners. Yes, yeah. So this whole notion of did we or didn't we, I think, is just a fool's errand to get into that debate. We did. The shame of it, to me, is number one, that we did it, and number two, that we ignore that we did it. President Obama said, well, we're going to look forward, we're not going to look back. There are a lot of criminals that wish that the prosecution took that attitude with them. But we can't do that. We're a party to the Convention Against Torture that says there is no justification whatsoever for torture, and there's a legal duty to investigate and prosecute allegations of torture. I get asked the question quite often of what's the definition of torture, and it's really hard to define. I think there's some things that any reasonable human being would agree, like yanking out somebody's fingernails or cutting off their fingers, or waterboarding, I would think for most people would be clearly in the torture category. I can tell you most of the useful information that we got from detainees, whether it was at the CIA black sites or at Guantanamo, came from sitting down like this and having a sandwich and a drink and developing a relationship and talking. Led to more useful information than using these enhanced techniques, which torture is great for making people talk, is not so good for making them tell the truth.
You had a great career in military. You were Air Force colonel. You were chief prosecutor in Guantanamo Bay. and you left, you resigned.
Right.
Why?
Well, I took the job I actually accepted the job in August of 2005 and had to pack up and move here to Washington. I got here in September. But when I came here believing what I think a majority of the public still believes, that everybody at Guantanamo was the worst of the worst. And I believe that we were committed to having full, fair, and open trials. I think I came into it, people from my generation look back at Nuremberg with this romanticized view that, we really did a good thing at Nuremberg. And I think my objective was that we would do this in a way that future generations would look back at Guantanamo the way that my generation looks back at Nuremberg. And so I think for the first almost 2 years, I believed we were really committed to trying to do this in a way that was credible, that would be a credit to our country and not an embarrassment to it. And it was over time that changed, and finally reached a point where I just said, I can't in good conscience be a part of this.
You said that Guantanamo is a big stain on American, I said white shirt, something like that. Can America government and people from America, can they just erase the stain? Is it possible to do that?
I think it is possible, but I think it took more than a decade to get to where we are, and it's going to take time. I mean, just closing Guantanamo is not going to erase the stain. It's going to take years of effort to do that, but I think it's a process we've got to begin, and it's in our interest to do it. I mean, I look back to, if you recall the first Gulf War, the war there was over in about 100 hours. We went from the border of Kuwait to downtown, the outskirts of downtown Baghdad in 100 hours with minimal casualties, and Iraqi troops that by the tens of thousands, without firing a shot, put their guns down and their hands up and surrendered. And they did that because they knew who we were. That if they surrendered to the Americans, that they were going to be treated properly, they were going to get food and shelter and medical care. Mm-hmm. And so rather than fight, they quit. And I can tell you, as a military member, I like that. I would prefer that the other side put their gun down and say, I quit, rather than fighting to the death. I question if today, the attitude in that region that they have about America, with visions of Abu Ghraib and drone strikes and Guantanamo and waterboarding and all the things that have happened since 9/11. Those Iraqi troops that surrendered back in 1991, would they do that today? If they thought they were going to be sexually humiliated and waterboarded and detained for the next 10 or 12 years, would they surrender or would they fight? And I think they'd fight. And it's not in our interest to have that kind of a reputation. So I think we've got to get on this road to recovery. And we do that by closing Guantanamo, repatriating the detainees that have been cleared, the ones that need to be prosecuted. And there are, that label, the worst of the worst. There are some at Guantanamo that match that label. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed needs to be prosecuted.
Mastermind of the...
Yeah, mastermind of 9/11, and proud of it. But he needs to be prosecuted in federal courts, not in this.
Yeah, we have here in the United States hundreds of cases in federal courts that are related to terrorism.
Yeah, it's a shame, and I think a real disservice to the American people that the far right has painted this false perception of the war on terror. We used to be called the land of the free and the home of the brave. And since 9/11, we've been the land of the constrained and the cowardly, where there's a lot of power and profit to be gained from keeping the country in fear. I don't know if you recall, Ben Franklin said anybody that would give up their liberty for their security deserves neither. And we're rapidly approaching that point. But our courts, the law, for 200 years, our strength, what really made, you always hear about American exceptionalism, what made us exceptional was the law. And then after 9/11, we've done everything humanly possible to avoid it. I mean, that's why Guantanamo was picked, because you had some people who thought it was outside the reach of the law. No federal court could touch it, the Cuban courts couldn't touch it, no international court. It was the perfect law-free place to exploit people for intelligence.
Yeah, but instead of that, on the end, in our interview, Guantanamo become actually symbol. And we have in history, just recent history, when you say Guernica, everybody knows is related with the Spanish war, you know, civil war, and of course Pablo Picasso. And when you say Sarajevo, for example, everybody knows it's related to World War I, and during the 90s, the longest siege in history. And when you say Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib,
yeah,
people know what you're talking about.
Right.
Just can you comment that for us?
No, you're exactly right. And I think what we need to do is have, when people think Guantanamo, they think a chapter in our history, not this ongoing saga that continues to strain what credibility we have left. I mean, it really is hard to lecture others about their behavior and the conduct we expect of them when we keep this facility open to indefinitely detain people that have been tortured, have never been charged with a crime. It's just, as the president said, you know, we cannot keep doing this. It's got to stop. And it's going to take the people saying, you know, this isn't who we are. These aren't American values. These aren't American principles. You know, we ought to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. So, you know, who's the home of the brave? So we've got to get back to being Americans and standing up for American values, and that means you either, you know, stand trial or you go home.
You obviously stand for human rights and our values, all of us. Thank you so much, Colonel Davis, for this interview.
Always choose to talk.
We ask the question, what is needed